Lyria screamed, slamming the door shut. What? What's wrong? Coleman snapped around and yelled. Lyria walked away from Elijah's room and headed straight for the opposing wall while cradling her head with an aghast expression. I'm sorry. The poor woman kept murmuring over and over again. Coleman ignored her as he stumbled to Elijah's door and frantically fumbled with the doorknob, hoping in his heart of hearts that he wasn't dead. Elijah, I'm here, buddy! Don't die! He screamed, falling inside. Jesus fuck, why? Elijah yelled while scrambling to get under the sheet. Kuribayashi was already under them with a crimson-red face, glaring daggers at the offender flopping on the ground like a fish out of water. Coleman continued to flail on the ground until he finally managed to get on his feet and looked around the room restlessly in an effort to figure out what was going on. His eyes finally settled on the pile of clothes at the foot of the bed, and finally at the occupants who were still glaring at him. The two parties continued to hold their hostile, but awkward, staring competition as silence filled the room. It wasn't until Coleman raised his hand in a point, still wobbling from his inebriation, did the silence break. Wait, you're not dead or dying? He stated the obvious. Elijah shook his head in utter confusion and raised both his hands in a pointed motion towards Coleman. What the actual fuck are you doing? The medic couldn't decide whether he was baffled more than he was outraged. Coleman finally gained a firm footing and realized his roommate was, in fact, not in mortal danger. Saving you? It seemed that was a question more aimed at himself than anyone else. Wait, why is Kuribayashi here? Coleman started to piece together some semblance of rational thought. His eyes drifted away from the two of them, down to the clothes scattered around the beds. Did you two fuck? He tried to question the two, but he was cut off by an object ricocheting off his head. Bunk! Kuribayashi had grabbed Elijah's datapad on the nightstand and sent it straight into Coleman's head with a hearty throw, sending him back to the ground. Can you kindly fuck off? She yelled in a rage. Elijah had his hand outstretched the moment he saw Kuribayashi grab his device and opened his mouth to yell no, but it was too late. He slowly brought both of his hands to his head to cradle the migraine that was forming behind his eyes. Why? He murmured, applying pressure. It was at this point Elijah knew that the judge was full of shit when he was told that the army was a superior alternative to prison. He should have just shut the fuck up and did his time. Fuck! Can you calm down? Ow! Coleman yelled, clutching his head. This time a pillow hit him in the head. No! Get the fuck out! Kuribayashi yelled again, grabbing another object. Coleman shielded himself as he came under assault from a flurry of projectiles. This is my dorm! He protested. This, however, seemed to anger Kuribayashi more, causing her to reach for a whole-ass lamp. Noticing the mortal danger he was in, Coleman used whatever was left of his faculties to focus on one thing. Getting the fuck out. However, with his coordination shot to shit, his fluid athletic movement turned into a stumble, and the moment he stepped through the threshold, Coleman dove to the right, just as a heavy lamp came sailing past him. The thing embedded itself into the wall just a meter from Lyria's head, where she was sitting in the corner. The poor woman snapped her head and paled when she noticed how close she came to having her head literally caved in by a metal lamp. Lyria sat there and stared at the object protruding from the wall, reflecting on the decisions that brought her to this point. Just how in the world did it come to this? It just all seemed surreal, especially when she heard more yelling from the female in their strange language, which prompted Coleman to roll over to the door and shut it with his foot before another crash resounded from the other side. It was as if Lyria was living through some chaotic comedy simulation she would watch when she was in her adolescence. Except she wasn't laughing. Lyria couldn't help but jokingly think that the only thing that was missing was the authorities barging in and arresting everyone. Coleman seemed to just take it in stride while he nursed his bruised head. The man put his weight against the door as he leaned back and sighed, dissatisfied with the fact that his chance at a nap had been squandered. It's not always this crazy. Coleman defended his people while yawning. For some reason, Lyria found that hard to believe from all that she had witnessed. Even the average human walking past her seemed to have an innate air of chaos to them, and no matter where they went, something unexpected always happened. Today was supposed to be simple and peaceful. Coleman exhaled and started stretching. I was supposed to have a nice date with the bed, but fuck me, alright. The man started to trail off with his words, as another large yawn escaped his lips while he spoke. Coleman decided this was as good as he was going to get, settling in and getting comfortable against the door. And when Lyria thought things couldn't get any worse, a series of heavy knocks came from the entrance of the dorm room. Private Kuribayashi! Corporal Elijah! This is the military police! A voice came from the outside. We'd like to have a word with you! Lyria snapped her head to the entrance, when the same strange human language resounded through the door. Due to the lack of understanding she had of the human's language, she thought Coleman had a visitor. However, panic and anxiety started to fill her heart when the tone started to become more aggressive as time went on. Open up! We know you two are in there! The banging continued, visibly shaking the door. She initially wondered why no one was addressing the clearly agitated individual on the other side of the door, until she turned around. Coleman was still leaning against Elijah's bedroom door, with his head tilted upward and his mouth agape, unconscious. It seemed that the man got his wish and promptly passed out. Coleman? Lyria nearly screeched in terror. Coleman simply let a rumble of air escape his gaping mouth as an answer. The voices from the outside had gone silent, but the intensity in which the door shook increased tenfold. Whoever was on the other side seemed like they were now trying to kick down the door. Coleman, please wake up! She screamed again, crawling over to him. Lyria grabbed a hold of his shoulders and started shaking him in an effort to wake the man up. Snap! Turning her head towards the entrance of the dorm, Lyria saw the door violently swing open from the force of two human men kicking at the same time. There seemed to be another stack of humans behind them with what looked like black eyes and bruises all over their exposed skin. However, everyone seemed to freeze in place in utter shock, not expecting to find an Imperial in the room, let alone Atari with aristocratic jewelry. Silence reigned as the two parties tried to get their bearings and recover from the surprise, but one of the humans reacted. Drawing his gun in near panic, the human pointed it at Lyria and started yelling commands. Show me your fucking hands! He screamed. The other humans finally recovered from their stupor and drew their pistols from their holsters. A cacophony of the human language and broken Imperial standard assaulted Lyria's ears, confusing her even more. Internally screaming and panic completely overwhelming her, Lyria couldn't help but wonder why they were so upset that they'd draw their weapons. But clarity soon filled her mind when she looked back over at Coleman. Lyria was looming over the unconscious man, with her hands resting on top of his shoulders, in a manner that looked extremely suspicious. Right. That makes sense, she spoke in her own heart, finally understanding the extremely hostile reaction. To make things worse, the moment she lifted her hands in the area to show she meant no harm, Coleman slumped over onto the floor and remained motionless. This is a misunderstanding. Lyria tried to stammer out, but was immediately tackled by a group of men trying to subdue her. We need a medic up here! One of them called out on his radio, rushing over to Coleman. Human soldiers flooded into the room to secure the Tari and drag an unconscious and snoring Coleman away from the fray. Sweeping the entire dorm room in pairs, the soldiers continued on with their original objective to secure their target. The group of men and women turned the entire place upside down, sparing no closet or drawer to chance, and Coleman seemed to sleep through all of it. Finally, they reached the final door, and the only place where their suspect could be hiding. Elijah's room. The soldiers stacked up on the other side of the door, holstered their pistols, and prepared themselves for what they assumed was going to be an intense last stand. However, the moment the door opened, the point man stormed in. They were greeted with nothing but a messy bed. Everyone scratched their heads in bewilderment. There was nowhere else they could have gone. The cameras showed they both entered this exact room. Dong! Every single man and woman snapped their heads towards the sound, and saw an open window with its curtains blowing with the wind. Running over and looking down, one of them saw the face of Elijah, halfway down a drainage pipe, with Kuribayashi bolting down the street. Elijah looked down to measure how far the drop was to the metal roofing of the lobby, before looking back up and giving whoever was peering out of his window the middle finger. Wait! Stop! An MP called out. However, Elijah simply let go of the drainage pipe, dropping several meters and slamming into the metal roof. Dong! Due to dropping higher than he initially intended, the impact disoriented and knocked the wind out of the man. He laid there for a few seconds, trying to right himself before rolling off and dropping himself onto the street. "Oh, fuck, that hurt," Elijah moaned, nursing his leg. Pushing through the pain, Elijah pulled himself back to his feet and off into a sprint the moment he saw Kuribayashi turn the corner into an alleyway. He tried to keep up, but his speed gradually faded into a hopping jog as the injured leg started to scream in pain after each step. Elijah gritted his teeth and tried to assess if the damned thing was possibly broken while in motion, but his musing was put to an end when the sound of struggling came from the alley. The moment he got close to the alleyway, the medic's sense of danger started to scream at him, saying to turn around and go another way. If it wasn't for the fact Kuribayashi ran that way, he well would have if it were anyone else. But Elijah couldn't just leave her high and dry. He readied himself for what was to come. It was do or die. But just as the man rounded the corner, Elijah's eyes went wide in horror. Kuribayashi was already on the floor, being subdued by several MPs, and Sergeant Major Preston, with a large ketchup stain smeared across the front of his uniform, staring right at him, holding a fucking shotgun. Thum! Shh! A beanbag round slammed into Elijah's stomach, making him recoil from the impact and knocking the wind out of him. Thum! Shh! Another beanbag round hit him, sending the medic tumbling backwards and falling onto his rear. Thum! "You're a goddamn menace, you know that, Drake?" Preston sneered, racking another round into his shotgun. "It's quite fucking impressive." Thum! "Eli!" Kuribayashi screamed while struggling. "Relax, Private. I didn't kill him." The Sergeant Major racked the shotgun one more time while walking towards Elijah. Elijah was filled with a muted rage after taking 4 less-than-lethal rounds to his torso, but there wasn't much he could do other than writhe in pain on the ground. Gritting his teeth as Preston casually strolled towards him, Elijah endured the pain and tried to stand up. Thump! The medic crumpled to his knees as a beanbag slammed right into his pelvis. "Settle down, boy. I don't take pleasure in this," Sergeant Major Preston lied, with a sadistic smirk on his face. Looming over Elijah, the Sergeant Major pressed his still-hot shotgun barrel against Elijah's cheek while he loaded a slug into his shotgun. "You've been a pain in my ass for years, Drake," he said with malice dripping from his voice. "So don't be fucking cute, you hear me?" Sensing the man wasn't fucking around, Elijah let out a sigh of defeat and allowed the MPs rushing over to cuff him. "I never understood you, boy." Preston finally lowered his weapon and cocked his head in bewilderment. "You're simultaneously the biggest piece of shit and the best soldier we ever had." Elijah slowly looked up with a look of disdain smeared across his face, while an MP snapped the plastic cuffs in place. "I hate the Army, and I want out!" he replied with resentment oozing from every word. Even though Sergeant Major Preston expected the answer, he couldn't help but be taken aback. "Get this son of a bitch out of my sight," he ordered his men. MPs roughly lifted the medic up and dragged him to an awaiting patrol car. Preston just shook his head at the sight, wondering why he expected anything else out of the man. Ever since Elijah got to his unit, it seemed someone very high up in the ladder had a vendetta against him and tried to make his life a living hell at every corner. "Wasted potential," he quietly muttered to himself, walking away. High Admiral Asina anxiously tapped the edge of her console, staring at orders she had just drafted, debating on whether sending it was a good idea or not. However, it was too late for regrets. The gears were already in motion, and now she just needed to wait for confirmation. Never had her nerves been this frayed. Sending these orders was tantamount to treason if anything went wrong. Not only was Asina's career on the line, but the life of her entire family would be snuffed out if they found any evidence of foul play. One of the many reasons why she avoided subterfuge at all costs. Asina nearly jumped out of her skin when her datapad screamed to life, informing her that she was being requested in a confidential holoconference. Before answering, the Admiral nervously looked around her private chambers to make sure no one was inside and every door was shut in order to maintain complete privacy. Once satisfied, she swiped the call to her console, which made Colonel Tyvonen and Colonel Findlay suddenly materialize in front of her. With a crisp human salute, the two stood at attention before relaxing themselves. "Good evening, Admiral. I say I'm quite impressed," Findlay smirked, leaning back into his chair. I thought I was going to have to do some cleaning up. Toivonen's eyes shifted over towards Findlay in disapproval. Yes, even our own soldiers think the supply ship ignored your orders and went into a hostile orbit. Again, she said, rolling her eyes. Colonel Toivonen never liked working with Findlay. Ever since she was transferred to Voltuk, the man was a fucking snake. However, when intrigue was your game, you wanted a snake. So, everything is going to plan? Asina asked tentatively. The humans are rioting? Even General Valen said it was a right clusterfuck until they got everything under control. Findlay responded and took a puff of his cigar. Asina sighed in relief. If it wasn't for life extension, she would swear that several years would have been taken off her life from the anxiety alone. She couldn't believe how these humans treated deception as a part of their very nature. Maybe working with them wasn't the most prudent of ideas. However, regardless of her reservations, their results spoke volumes. Now that she had a decent grasp of their capabilities, she might have a chance at taking back lost Imperial worlds. Especially her home. Things are going so well, we've even caught a few more pieces for the board, Findlay chuckled. If you authorize us to use them, that is. Asina's eyebrow raised at the man, but Toivonen clicked her tongue in irritation. Stop being unnecessarily cryptic, Findlay, she chided. Toivonen tapped on her datapad and swiped towards the Admiral to send her dossiers of the recent arrest of an Imperial junior officer. Our forces have recently arrested 2nd Lieutenant Lyria Aurelia, the daughter of a mid-ranking Imperial noble with a conspiracy to commit sabotage. The colonel displayed Lyria's mugshot and dossier in the conference space. Asina nearly recoiled at the mention of the name of such a famous and wealthy family. Arresting the girl for conspiracy of anything was tantamount to political suicide. The girl's father would never stand for it. I am unsure this course of action is wise, the Admiral interjected. The girl's father is extremely wealthy and influential, even though he's of middling rank. Toivonen didn't even respond and opted to send another file into the shared space, causing Asina to cringe. Admiral, our arrest has legs, Toivonen corrected. Lady Aurelia was caught in a human dorm, looming over a drugged human male while in possession of extremely confidential materials. As it stands, she's facing the charges conspiracy to commit sabotage, attempted rape, resisting arrest, assault of an officer, theft of confidential information, unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents or material, conspiracy to distribute classified documents or material, and seditious conspiracy. The colonel started listing off every crime the woman committed. Asina felt like a hammer had hit her in the face. That was enough to execute the entire family. These humans weren't just throwing the book at her, but the entire judicial system. Are you sure? The Admiral tentatively asked. Are you sure she has done this and you have evidence? Toivonen tapped away at her phone and swiped videos, pictures, and more documents to the shared space. We have enough evidence to convict her of every crime we've listed, even if it came for her to be judged by a jury of her peers, Toivonen explained, deadpan. High Admiral Asina paled when she watched the video feed of the forced entry to the human door and Lyria's arrest. This wouldn't have been a big deal if it wasn't for the fact that Lyria Aurelia's family was in the Admiral's faction. Asina put her hands over her face in despair. This wouldn't only be a crippling blow to the faction's reputation, her personal reputation. She herself may come under investigation and be relieved of command, or exiled. Seeing her distraught, Toivonen looked over at Findlay to signal her part had ended. However, we have no intention of charging her for any of that, Findlay said casually, lifting his legs up onto his desk. Asina slowly lifted her face to look at the man. What do you mean? She stammered. Findlay turned his head towards Toivonen to hide the smile that was spreading across his face after having his little trap spring so flawlessly. We'd just like a few favors down the road, along with your cooperation and backing if humanity is ever in a position to need it. He started playing with his cigar. Asina locked eyes with the man and felt the metaphorical claws sink deep into her sides. Her mind raced for any way out. However, she had not only implicated herself with her involvement with the supply ship, but this document would be the nail in the coffin. Her coffin. Now that she thought about it, they had enough to execute her and everyone she was associated with. A long silence reigned over the conference space as she started unraveling the depths of the human's deception. Asina started to breathe heavily as her heart hammered in her chest and her mind scrambled to try to find a way out of the hole she dug herself in. No. That these humans have dug for her and tricked her into lying in it with their honeyed words. What do you want me to do? Asina looked down. Her ears drooped and her voice became soft in defeat. For now, send your orders and put Lady Aurelia on the path to becoming your arbiter. This time Toivonen spoke up. And make yourself and her the reason why humans have access to imperial cafeterias. Toivonen and Findlay looked at each other for a brief moment and nodded in satisfaction. We'll be in touch, Admiral, Findlay said, standing up and stretching. And be aware, humanity treats their friends extremely favorably. Findlay then flickered and disappeared as he logged off. Asina had a miserable look on her face and turned towards Toivonen, who regarded her for a moment before letting out a sigh. I apologize for how this went down, but you must understand. Toivonen started walking towards the High Admiral. We're new and vulnerable in this wide and scary galaxy. So we do what we must. Toivonen stopped at the foot of Asina's desk and looked down at her. But be aware, Admiral. Humanity might treat their friends well, but we make horrible enemies. She finished before flickering out of existence. High Admiral Asina sat there in muted terror. Never in her long life had anyone made her feel so helpless. She stared hard at the orders she was about to send, the final nail in the coffin, the nail that would spell the doom for her, her family, and all of her friends if the humans thought it was necessary. However, it was far too late for any regrets now. High Admiral Asina clicked send and hammered in that last nail. Orders of dismissal. 2. Ordo Bellum. Grand Admiral Lustria Kelivarius. Grand Marshal Velassia Brachius. From High Admiral Nadia Asina. High Marshal Avadi Sasori is hereby dismissed from command of the Valtuk Ground Forces for dereliction of duty, effective immediately.